This is the Borders of Equality podcast, a podcast about immigration and political economy. I am Alex Afonso, and this is the second part of an episode on migrant workers, the labour market, and the pandemic. You can listen to the first part of the episode where I speak to a young migrant worker and his life during the corona crisis on our SoundCloud, Stitcher, Podbean, or iTunes channel. Slaughterhouses have been in the media now for a number of weeks, in the Netherlands, but also Germany, the United Kingdom, or the United States. They have been hotspots for COVID outbreaks. One major element that has come to light is the poor working conditions and low wages of workers in these workplaces. Because of these working conditions that are unattractive for native workers, they employ large numbers of migrant workers housed and transported together, often in cramped houses and buses, and with insufficient attention for health and safety. In this episode, I talked to Imke van Gardingen, a policy advisor at the Dutch Trade Union Federation FNV. With Imke, we talk about the regulation of this type of work, why people choose to ignore it, and how it could be improved. Okay, hi Imke, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
In recent weeks, the situation of migrant workers in the Netherlands has come under the spotlight because of a number of outbreaks in workplaces that employed many migrant workers. So, Imke, you've been working on the situation of migrant workers in the Netherlands for quite a long time. Were you actually surprised that these outbreaks happened in these places?
Well, no, in fact, we're not surprised at all. Actually, in the beginning of the crisis, in the first week that the government announced all the measurements, we warned that this was bound to happen. We've known how migrant workers are crammed together in housing facilities, travel together in buses to workplaces where they also work quite closely together, not only work quite closely together, but also in canteens. And so we knew that was going to happen, and it's not a surprise that it happened. It's sad, of course, because we could have been prepared to avoid this, but no, we're not surprised. Yeah, actually, what does surprise me is that obviously a lot of people are not aware about it, um, about what's happening, and it seems to me that it's more like a choice to not know about it because it has been very well known for ages. This is a discussion that has been going on in the parliament, in newspapers for at least over 10 years. So, in my opinion, if you don't know about it, it's more like because you choose not to know about it. And what happens is that in a lot of sectors, where a lot of, well, I would say cheap labor force is needed, um, there are not enough workers in the Netherlands to do this work under these conditions, we should add. And so there are a lot of employers, temp agencies actively looking for workers in mainly Eastern European or Southern European countries.
So can you tell us a little bit about how this business model actually works? So from what we've gathered from the press, workers are recruited abroad by agencies, sign a contract there, are then brought to the Netherlands, and the company that employs them provides for housing and then dispatches them to different employers. Can you explain a little bit how this model works?
We have the freedom of movement, free movement of workers and free movement of services in Europe. And that's a good thing. But what we can see happening is that workers are not coming here to the Netherlands to find a job that suits them, find housing facilities that suit their living situation. But it's quite the other way around. Recruiters are going to the sending countries, mainly in Eastern Europe and Southern European countries, and offer package deals. So that would include a job, but also housing, transport, and healthcare. So when they arrive in the Netherlands, most workers, and it's not in all cases, but a lot of workers would sign a contract for work, housing, transport, and health insurance. And it's not an option. It's not that you can negotiate, like, I would prefer the housing over there, or I would like to, well, think about whether or not I will take the offer to have transport to my workplace. And that's what makes it very difficult to for workers to have a strong position.
Because the employer controls all the components of the package deal.
Exactly. And well, it's not that it's standard, but we can hear a lot of migrant workers saying that they are not, that they um, at some point are told that you should take your stuff and be moved to another housing facilities, or you could come home and then find somebody else in your in your bedroom. You mostly you share your bedroom with at least one person, and that there could be somebody else lying next to you that day. So it's also a breach in privacy for a lot of workers. And it's one thing that this is a business model, but our main concern is also that it is um, um, part of the Dutch legislation. We have the Minimum Wage Act, and in this act, it's forbidden to deduct from minimum wages from workers. And that's a good thing because you should be allowed to get your whole wage. But there's an exception, and that's for rent. So you can deduct 25% of the wage for housing facilities. And 25% might not seem so much, but that's really a lot. And it's exactly the approximately €100 a month, a week, that workers pay for a bed. You can see if you have seen a lot of contracts, you can see that mostly a bed is approximately €100 a week, and that's exactly the amount that can be deducted from your minimum wage.
So in what kind of sectors is it especially important, this type of business model? We've talked about slaughterhouses, there's agriculture, I suppose.
Yeah, the slaughterhouses are in the media, all over the media now because of the coronavirus. But similar business models we can see in the distribution center, and also in agriculture, in the logistics, in transport, international transport, shipbuilding. So it's mainly the sectors that are known for having a lot of workers from abroad.
And these are workers that work mostly minimum wage.
Yes, absolutely.
I can imagine that there are different types of employers. Not all of them are completely unscrupulous, but with this business model, it is in the interest of the employer to minimize the cost and the quality of the housing while it can deduct the maximum legally possible from the wages. So what workers take home every month is basically below minimum wage in terms of net income.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good that you mentioned this because it's absolutely true that not all employers are like these bad people. But the thing is that this is justified by the Minimum Wage Act. And what they do is not illegal. It is not it doesn't make you a good employer if you maximize the deductions, but it's legalized, and that's the well, that's the main frustration, maybe, that we oppose to this kind of practice. And you can see all over the news that people agree that this is not a good thing, the way that people are housed. But it's not a practice of bad employers. It's just in the Dutch law that it allows these kind of practices.
Because Dutch labor law seems to be, at least my impression is that Dutch labor law seems to be quite protective for people in, let's say, regular employment, which includes most of the Dutch workforce. But there seems to be significant gaps for the kind of peripheral labor market in which these migrant workers work. So it seemed to be like a really big contrast between the conditions that prevail for most Dutch workers and these loopholes where essentially only migrant workers work.
Well, this is not a distinction between migrant workers and local workers.
Mhm.
This act and this exception in the Dutch Minimum Wage Act is not um, addressed to migrant workers, especially. But in practice, it's something that migrant workers deal with, and it's one thing that it has this perverse effect that it's good to keep to have this deduction of 25%, but it's also like we discussed before that on this 25%, you don't pay any taxes and also employer premium. So that makes it also very attractive to use this model. And what you're saying about the difference between flex and people who have a regular contract, that's maybe one of the core problems, because what we can see is that a lot of migrant workers work in flexible contracts, short and also not secure of how many hours they would get in a week. So all the we have made an action plan on labor migration, and one of the four main themes is to improve the flex market, and that's not specifically addressed to migrant workers, but in the end, a lot of migrant workers face all the problems that come along with this flexible labor market.
So, what would be the main action points that you think would improve the situation?
Well, first of all, it's important to make a cut that your employer is not also your landlord.
Mhm.
When we talk with colleagues in Belgium, also with law enforcement in Belgium, they are amazed that it's possible in the Netherlands to have your employer also be your landlord, and all the vulnerabilities that come along with that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that um, we should, on European level, work harder on having a fair mobility of workers. We have a lot of directives, a lot of regulations, but in the end, it's not enough to secure a social agenda, a good position for workers, for mobile workers. And one of the main problems is also enforcement, the lack of enforcement in that. And if we don't work harder on having a more kind of mobility for workers that is fair, then it is difficult to have a to support this free mobility. Then the criticism on labor mobility will only grow. And the third thing is to improve the flexible labor market in the Netherlands. It is because of all these possibilities to hire workers temporarily and also for very small contracts that the labor migrants face all these problems. That one of the main complaints is also that they didn't know that they would get all these small flexible contracts, because then um, if they would have known beforehand, it would have been mainly Spanish workers complained a lot about that. Last year there were a lot of Spanish workers complaining about their working conditions in the Netherlands, and one of their main issues was also that they didn't know about the fact that they would get a 0-hour contract or just for a few months. So that's the third thing, and the fourth is enforcement. It is a very big problem that we have all regulations, and some of them are very good, but they're not enforced. And actually, it's a bit sad because there are a lot of good inspectors working at the labor inspectorates, but somehow it seems to be difficult to be effective. And I'm not sure if that's only because of the understaffment. They present an annual analysis on the Dutch labor market, And these are really fantastic. If you read the analysis they produce annually, it's exactly what is wrong on the Dutch labor market, and also how workers are exposed to exploitation.
My impression is that the situation of migrant workers in the Netherlands, but this also probably applies to other countries as well, that most people don't really have an idea of these working conditions and this business model and the conditions in which many of these workers actually work. Is it surprising? So this is the topic that you work on, that you're very active in, but how do you explain that this is something that is mostly invisible for most people?
Well, like I said before, it's also a choice not to know, because
Mhm.
it's been in the newspaper, all over the newspaper for the last 10 years, maybe, sometimes a bit more, but especially last year, there's been a lot of media coverage on this, on the way that migrant workers are housed and also the conditions that they work in. Also, in meat processing, it can be a surprise that the working conditions are very poor there. So on the one hand, yes, it's a choice not to know, in my opinion. But on the other hand, we can also see that there's almost like this parallel society. There was a journalist last year, and he investigated the working conditions in a distribution center, and also lived for a couple of weeks in on a camping with a lot of migrant workers.
Mhm.
And that's how he defined it. That's how he framed it. And I think he is right. There is a parallel society, workers living in quite isolated from other communities, living in working in well, almost like boxes, like distribution centers with no windows. We can't see
Mhm.
them; they can see us. So it's very easy to not know about it if you don't want to, because we can't see them, we can't hear them. And that's what I think is very good. One of my colleagues, he has a team where they go to housing facilities, talk with a lot of migrant workers, and um, they tell us about their housing and working conditions, and also that it's very different from what they expected when they came here. Because it's one thing that we as trade union think that it should be better and should be different, but it is possible that migrant workers consider this to be better than the conditions in their home country. But what we
Mhm.
actually do hear a lot is that workers um, say that they are very disappointed, that they thought in the Netherlands everything was well taken care of. But what they can see now is that these promises are not well, they're not true. The pictures that they got from houses where they would live in are very different. They just get a bed. The working conditions are different from what they're promised, and also the hours that they're not that they don't get sufficient hours. It's not something that they knew before they came here. Yeah.
So now this topic has come under the spotlight because of the Corona crisis, and do you think that this, even if this, you said that this has been a topic for the last 10 years, but now that it really becomes an issue to to contain the spread of the virus, do you see more political intervention happening to improve these conditions?
Well, there's been a debate in the parliament. We have a team. They're called in Dutch the aanjaagteam, and they
Hmm.
should advise the government on measures to improve the situation. Now for urgent measures, but also for the longer term. What we can see in those discussions is that there is always a group saying, well, everybody agrees now that there should be conditions should improve, and that this is not a good thing. But you can see a group saying that, well, within this frame, we can work on improvements, and then we can change a bit here, and then we can improve a bit there. But in basically the system, how we do it now is good. And then we can see a group, and we're in that group is saying that no, this is structurally not good. It doesn't make sense to just improve a bit here and there. We should actually look at how we organize our work, and how flexible work, how we how we still make it possible that the employer is also your landlord. This is something that needs to be changed structurally, and I hope this will well, I hope that we can achieve that, but I'm not sure that if this is enough to actually change this for the better. We in Germany there is a new legislation from January next year that in meat processing, workers should be hired directly, not through all temp agencies or other that you get a long chain of employers.
Subcontracting.
Subcontracting, exactly. And this is a good step forward. And I hope that in the Netherlands we will have the same structural changes, but I'm not convinced yet that it will happen.
Do you think that this is difficult with the current political power relationships in government?
Absolutely. This is not a government who will want to change this business model, and also not the way that we would prefer to not have all the subcontractors. And this is not about having migrant workers or not. This is about having this long chain of subcontractors where employees do not even know who is in the end the responsible person, where they can go to when something is not good in their contract.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.